Mr. Mix, I get to introduce you, sir. Mark Mix is the president of the Right to Work Committee and the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, a position he has held since 2003. For decades, Mr. Mix has been a stalwart defender of workers' rights and independence, providing legal assistance and protection for workers against abuses of forced unionization. Mr. Mix holds a BA from James Madison University. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Senator Sanders, for the opportunity to appear here, Senator Cassidy and other members of the Senate. I am Mark Mix. I've been the president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation for 20 years and the National Right to Work Committee for 20 years. I've been working in the right to work movement for 36 years. Grew up in a small town with more cows than people. My stepfather was a International Association machinist member for 32 years. Grew up in a union household in a union environment in America. And it wasn't until I understood what labor law looks like as it compels workers going back to the 1930s to join and associate with an organization. Senator Sanders, you talked about constitutional rights and the constitutional right to organize. I mean, surely you're talking about the NAACP versus Alabama case in 1958, where the First Amendment was basically defined as being the right to associate, but also the right not to associate. And yet labor law, written back in 1935, talks about all of these flowery things, but in Section 7 of the Act, it says that workers have all these rights, and they have the right to refrain. And if there had been a period at that moment, we probably wouldn't be here today, because that would have given workers the choice under the National Labor Relations Act to refrain from union activity. But it didn't. It went on except to the extent that a worker can be compelled to pay dues or fees or join a union at that time in order to work or get or keep a job. So the constitutional right comes with the right to associate, and so it presupposes the right not to associate. But yet labor policy and the policies that are pushed by, unfortunately, the National Labor Relations Board and legislative bodies across the country continue to rely on force as opposed to voluntarism. And you know, it's an interesting story when you think about the origins of the union. Samuel Gompers, the founder of the AFL, in his final speech in El Paso, Texas in 1924, when you were getting ready to come to Congress in 1926 for the Railway Labor Act and imposing the federal imposition of unionization on railway employees across the country, Gompers gave his final speech saying, "The workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions. Anything else, using force, will destroy that which together through voluntarism is invincible." And what Gompers' message was very clear, and it's to the union officials down the row here on the table, that you have a great product. Go sell that product. Don't rely on government to give you the force to compel people to join unions. And that's exactly what happens in the American workplace today, whether it be at the National Labor Relations Board ignoring the ideas and the views of literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees. At the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, we've had the privilege of representing hundreds of thousands of employees in litigation against employers and unions. When employers violate workers' rights, we go after them. When unions violate workers' rights, we go after them. The idea of individual freedom and choice is a fundamental principle of who we are as a country, yet labor law destroys that fundamental voluntarism and independence that most workers enjoy. So I'm here today, Senator Sanders, you talked about one way to realize the American dream is to join a union. There are lots of other ways, and there are lots of other examples of that. And frankly, today, 94% of the workers in the private sector in America today are not part of a union and not members of unions. Many of them would like to be, and you've heard President O'Brien talk about the high rate of favorability of labor unions. Absolutely, labor unions are being considered as favorable by the American public. But the other question in that Gallup poll that he cites was not referenced in the media, and that asked those non-union employees that were surveyed whether they had any interest in joining a union. 58% said they had no interest in joining a union. 11% said, yeah, they are very interested. And in the medium, in the middle there were peaks that said, well, I don't really know or I don't care. So the idea of giving a private organization the ability to compel someone to pay union dues or fees as a condition of getting or keeping a job is the wrong policy, not only for organized labor, but the wrong policy for America. Giving workers a choice whether or not they want to associate, but yet the labor policy of this country, once a majority of those voting in a workplace can bind and compel people to associate with a labor union. You know, in regular business law, we know the elements of a contract include, a meeting of the minds. It means no direct duress. It means it must be legal and there must be consideration. Labor law in America today and since 1935 has stood that basic agency relationship on its head by allowing a private organization to compel workers to associate with them and accept their representation, even though they didn't ask for it, didn't want it, and may not even be interested in it because it hurts them. You know, there are lots of opportunities to explain how a union collective bargaining agreement can hurt the very worker that it claims to represent. And union officials here don't ever recognize that. Somehow they know better than any individual worker in the workplace about what's right or wrong for them. I disagree with that. The right to work principle is a very simple principle. I would encourage you to support Senator Paul's bill, Senate Bill 532, that doesn't add a single word to federal law, not one. It simply goes back into that antiquated labor policy of the 1930s and removes compulsion and makes the bias of this government in favor of voluntary unionism. I think that's a good policy for America, and I think most American workers do as well.
Mr. Mix, thank you very much.